Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Hot Dad Reads, where I read you the book every night, unless, I'm really tired or something. Alrighty. Hello. Oh, we got Dancing Kirby's. Nice. So, what do we got? It's Monday, so let's remind everyone what the channel's about. This is where basically I, as a father, finally do all the homework that I was supposed to do back when I was in high school. There's a ton of books that I was assigned to read that I just never read. And so I'm reading them now. And while I was actually never assigned to read Les Miserables, this is, hey buddy, this is my cat. It's a good book. I'm excited to read it. And, hey. Did you notice that I wasn't covered in cat hair and you came to fix that? You're like, you can't be on the internet and not just covered in hair. Thanks, buddy. So, yeah. It's the summer, so basically, we're doing like the big summer reading. Get everyone ready before we get back to school. And then, at some point, we'll read things that people actually have assigned, Or the books that you always like to read or that you never got the chance to read, That's really what it's about. So basically, let me do your homework for you. Go play video games. Go for a walk. Go change the sheets on your bed, whatever it is, and let me read to you. We're, pretty sure it's chapter 2. Yeah. We're in part 1, book 8, After Effect, chapter 2. We're almost through with the whole first part, so let's jump in here. Chapter 2, Fantine Happy. She gave no start of surprise or expression of joy. She was joy itself. That simple question, and Cosette, was put with such profound faith, such certainty, such a complete absence of anxiety and doubt, he was left speechless. She went on, I knew you were here. I was asleep, but I was watching you. I've been watching you for a long time. My eyes have been following you all night. You were in a halo of light, and you had all kinds of heavenly figures around you. He looked up at the crucifix. But tell me now, she said, where's Cosette? Why didn't you put her on my bed to be there when I woke up? Responding instinctively, he gave some reply he was never afterwards able to recall. Fortunately, having been told of his arrival, the doctor had turned up. He came to Monsieur Madeleine's aid. My child, said the doctor, calm yourself. Your child is here. Fantine's eyes lit up, brightening her whole face. She clasped her hands with an expression containing at once all the most violent and most tender feelings of which entreaty is capable. Oh, she exclaimed, bring me my little baby. A mother's pathetic delusion. For her, Cosette was still a babe in arms. Not yet, said the doctor. Not right now. You still have a lingering fever. Seeing your child would excite you and be bad for you. You must get better first. She interrupted him vehemently. But I am better. I tell you I am better. Is he a fool, this doctor? Honestly, I want to see my child. You see how worked up you're getting? Said the doctor. So long as you're like this, I won't allow you to have your child. It isn't enough to see her, you have to live for her. When you behave sensibly, I'll bring her to you myself. The poor mother bowed her head. I'm sorry, doctor, I'm truly sorry. In the past, I would never have spoken the way I did just now. I've suffered so many setbacks, I don't know what I'm saying sometimes. I understand. You're afraid of it being too much for me. I'll wait as long as you like, but I swear to you it wouldn't have done me any harm to see my daughter. I can see her. I've not taken my eyes off her since yesterday evening. If she were brought to me now, I'd talk to her quietly. That's all. Isn't it perfectly natural I should want to see my child after someone's gone specially to fetch them from Montfermeil? I'm not angry. I know I'm going to be happy. All through the night, I saw those white things and people smiling at me. The doctor will bring my Cosette to me when she wants to. I haven't any fever because I'm better now. I feel there's nothing at all the matter with me anymore. But just to please these good women, I'm going to behave as if I were ill and lie still. Once they see I'm quite calm, they'll say she must be allowed to have her child. Monsieur Madeleine sat on a chair beside the bed. She turned to him, visibly striving to appear calm and well-behaved, as she put it, in that state of weakness resembling infancy to which she was reduced by illness, so that, seeing she was so quiet, there would be no objection to having Cosette brought to her. However, even as she held herself in check, she could not help asking Monsieur Madeleine countless questions. Did you have a good journey, Monsieur le Maire? Now, how kind of you to go and fetch her for me. Just tell me how she is. Was the traveling not too much for her? Oh dear, she won't recognize me. After all this time, she'll have forgotten me, poor little mite. Children don't remember. They're like birds. They see one thing today and another thing tomorrow, and they don't remember anything. Did she have some clean clothes, at least? Did those Thénardiers look after her properly? How did they feed her? Oh, if you only knew how much I've suffered wondering about all these things during the bad times I've had. That's in the past now. I'm overjoyed. Oh, how I should like to see her. Monsieur le Maire, did you find her pretty? Isn't she beautiful, my daughter? You must have been very cold in that coach. Couldn't she be brought to me just for a moment? They could take her away straight after. You tell them. Being the mayor, you could tell if you wanted to. He took her hand. Cosette is beautiful, he said. Cosette is in good health. You'll see her soon. But calm down. You're getting too excited. And besides, you're not keeping your arms covered, and that's making you cough. Indeed, fits of coughing interrupted Fantine at almost every word. Fantine did not grumble. She was afraid of having jeopardized with a few over-impassioned complaints the trust she wanted to inspire, and she started prattling. Montfermeil is quite pretty, isn't it? People go there on outings in the summer. Do those Thénardiers do good business? Not many people pass through their part of the world. It's a bit run down, that inn of theirs. Monsieur Madeleine was still holding her hand and observing her with anxiety. It was evident he had come to tell her things he was now in two minds about mentioning. His visit over, the doctor had left. Soir Simplice remained alone with them. But in the midst of this pause, Fantine exclaimed, I can hear her. My God, I can hear her. She stretched out her arm to stop them talking, held her breath, and began to listen enraptured. There was a child playing in the yard, the child of the doorkeeper or one of the women workers. It was one of those coincidences you keep coming across that seem to form part of the mysterious staging of woeful events. A child, a little girl. The child, a little girl, was running to and fro to keep warm, laughing, singing at the top of her voice. Children's games get mixed up with everything else. More's the pity. It was this little girl that Fantine heard singing. Oh, she said, it's my Cosette. I remember her voice. Then the child was off again, and her voice died away. Fantine listened for a while longer. Then her face clouded over, and Monsieur Madeleine heard her say quietly, How cruel that doctor is not to let me see my daughter. He has a nasty face, that man. But the underlying gladness of her thoughts came to the surface again. With her head resting on the pillow, she continued to talk to herself. How happy we're going to be! For a start, we'll have a little garden. Mr. Madeline promised me. My daughter will play in the garden. She must have learned her letters by now. I'll teach her to spell. She'll run through the grass chasing butterflies. I'll watch her. Then she'll make her first communion. Now let's see, when will she make her first communion? She began to count on her fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. She's 7 years old. In 5 years' time, she'll have a little white veil and lace stockings. She'll look like a little lady. Oh, my dear sister, you don't know how foolish I am. I was just thinking of my daughter's first communion. And she started laughing. He had let go of Fantine's hand. He listened to these words as if listening to the wind blowing, with his eyes on the ground, his mind deep in fathomless thoughts. All at once she stopped talking, and this automatically made him raise his head. Fantine now looked ghastly. She did not speak. She did not breathe. She was half sitting up. Her thin shoulder emerged from her nightdress. Her face, radiant the moment before, was deathly pale, and with eyes widened in terror, she seemed to be staring at something appalling in front of her in the other side of the room. "My God!" he exclaimed. "Fantine, what's wrong?" She did not reply. She did not take her eyes off whatever it was she thought she saw. She touched his arm with one hand and with the other pointed behind him. He turned and saw Javert. I need water. No. I was at a general meeting. Yeah. Pardon me. I was at a general meeting for the play festival that's doing the play that I wrote. So I was talking loudly to a lot of people in an echoey room. And I had a lot of sugar all weekend. I really should have had more water, but finally got to see the movie Oppenheimer. I have many thoughts, most of them good. I think that Christopher Nolan has a lot of tricks. He's got his particular director things that he does, and this was a movie that was actually well suited to him. It all of his tricks actually really fit the model and the theme. But butter and popcorn and salt and all the things. Eats at the voice a little bit. And then today, all the talking I did. But I'm really excited. It's gonna be a fun festival. Good people, good plays. My cast is awesome. I'm really excited. So if you're in Pittsburgh, it's the last weekend of August. The Pittsburgh New Works Festival at the Genesius Theater. Oh wow, it's the same day I have a haircut. I'm gonna look good. Yeah, it starts not the last. Well, yeah, I don't know. The 24th through 27th. There's 2 on the Saturday, I think. So I should get to see it at least 3 times, I hope. Yeah. Anyway, so that's been some of my fun dad things. So my little girl, she's about 10 months old, and this is my little boy. Hey, buddy. But she's finally playing little repetitive games. She'll crawl up towards the couch and I'll catch her, and then she'll escape, and then she'll come back and I'll catch her and escape, and I'm so happy. Hot Dad Reads is about being a hot dad who reads, but you still have to tell the dad stories, and I don't know, today's a good day. But what's not a good day is when Javert shows up. Chapter 3, Javert Satisfied. This is what had happened. midnight had just struck when Monsieur Madeleine left the court of Assizes in Arras. He returned to his inn just in time to set out again by the mail coach, in which it will be remembered he had reserved his seat. A little before 6 in the morning he had arrived at Montreuil-sur-Mer, and his first concern had been to drop his letter to Monsieur Laffitte in the post, then go to the infirmary and see Fantine. However, he had hardly left the courtroom when the public prosecutor, recovering from his initial shock, had taken the floor to deplore the honorable mayor of Montreuil-sur-Mer's act of insanity, to declare that his own convictions were in no way altered by this bizarre incident that would later be elucidated, and to demand in the meantime the conviction of this Champmathieu, clearly the real Jean Valjean. The public prosecutor's persistence was obviously at odds with everyone else's feeling, that of the public, the court, and the jury. The defense counsel had little difficulty in refuting this argument and establishing that the revelations made by Monsieur Madeleine, that is to say, by the real Jean Valjean, put a completely different complexion on the case, and all that the jury now had standing before them was an innocent man. The lawyer had drawn from this a few sententious and unfortunately not unfamiliar conclusions regarding judicial errors and such like. The presiding judge, in this summing up, had aligned himself with the defense counsel, and within a few minutes the jury had cleared Champmathieu of any wrongdoing. Nevertheless, the public prosecutor had to have a Jean Valjean, and not having Champmathieu anymore, he took Madeleine. Immediately after Champmathieu had been released, the public prosecutor closeted himself with the presiding judge. They conferred as to the necessity of the taking into custody of the person of Monsieur le Maire of Montreuil-sur-Mer. This phrase, in which there were a great many ofs, was Monsieur l'Avocat General's, penned entirely by the public prosecutor in his report to the public prosecutor-in-chief. His initial sympathy having dissipated, the presiding judge raised few objections. After all, justice must take its course. And then, all things considered, although the judge was a decent and fairly intelligent man, he was at the same time a strong and almost ardent royalist, and had been shocked to hear the mayor of Montreuil-sur-Mer refer to the Emperor and not Bonaparte when speaking of the landing at Cannes. The arrest warrant was accordingly issued. The public prosecutor sent it by special messenger, riding as fast as he could go to Montreuil-sur-Mer, instructing Police Inspector Javert to implement it. As we know, Javert had returned to Montreuil-sur-Mer immediately after having made his statement. Javert was just getting up when the messenger delivered the arrest warrant and summons. The messenger was also a very capable policeman who succinctly informed Javert of what had taken place at Arras. The arrest warrant, signed by the public prosecutor, was worded as follows: Inspector Javert will arrest Sire? I've never seen that word. Inspector Javert will arrest Sire Madeleine, mayor of Montreuil-sur-Mer, who in this day's court hearing was identified as the convicted felon freed on parole, Jean Valjean. Anyone who did not know Javert and had seen him as he came through the entrance hall to the infirmary could have had no idea of what was going on, and would have thought he was just his usual self. He was cold, calm, serious, his gray hair perfectly smooth over his temples, and he had just climbed the stairs with his usual deliberation. Anyone who knew him well and observed him closely would have quaked. Instead of being at the nape of his neck, the buckle on his leather collar was below his left ear. This betrayed unprecedented agitation. Javert was a consistent character, allowing no flaw in the execution of his duty or in his uniform, rigorous with villains, uncompromising with his coat buttons. For him to have buckled his collar awry, there must have been one of those emotional upheavals inside him that might be called inner earthquakes. He had come without any fuss, had requisitioned from the nearby guardhouse a corporal and 4 soldiers, left the soldiers in the courtyard, and asked the unsuspecting doorkeeper, accustomed as she was to seeing armed men ask for the mayor, to be directed to Fantine's room. When he came to Fantine's room, Javert turned the handle, pushed the door open as softly as a sick nurse or a police spy, and entered. Strictly speaking, he did not enter. He stood in the half-open doorway, his hat on his head and his left hand inside his coat that was buttoned up to the chin. In the crook of his arm could be seen the metal knob of his enormous cane, which disappeared behind him. So he remained for almost a minute without anyone noticing his presence. All at once Fantine looked up, saw him, and made Monsieur Madeleine turn around. The instant Madeleine's eyes met Javert's, Javert, without moving, without stirring, without stepping closer, became atrocious. No human sentiment can be quite as appalling as joy. It was the face of a demon on retrieving one of his damned. The certainty that at last he had Jean Valjean in his grasp revealed in his countenance everything that was in his soul. The stirred depths rose to the surface. The humiliation of having lost the trail for a while and having been briefly mistaken about that Champmathieu was blotted out by his pride in having so shrewdly suspected in the first place and in having had for so long the right instinct. Javert's contentment was blatant in his lordly attitude. Warped triumph illuminated that narrow brow. It was a display of the full horror that a satisfied face can present. Javert was in 7th heaven at that moment. Without being distinctly aware of it, yet with a vague intuition of his indispensability and his success, he, Javert, personified justice, light and truth in the heavenly capacity for crushing evil. Behind and around him, reaching to infinite depths, he had authority, reason, a definitive verdict, legal integrity, the vindication of public morality, every star in his favor. He was protecting order, delivering the law's thunderbolt, avenging society. He was the enforcer of the absolute. He rode on a cloud of glory. There was in his victory a trace of defiance and challenge. Standing proud and resplendent, he paraded in the azure heavens the superhuman bestiality of a ferocious archangel. The terrible shadow of the deed he was doing revealed the dim gleam of society's sword in his clenched fist. Rejoicing and indignant under his heel, he crushed crime, vice, rebellion, damnation, hell. He blazed. He exterminated. He smiled. And there was an incontestable grandeur in this monstrous Saint Michael. There was nothing ignoble about Javert in this frightfulness. Probity, sincerity, forthrightness, conviction, the concept of duty are things that may grow hideous when misguided, but, even hideous, grand remain. Intrinsic to the human conscience, their majesty persists even in horror. They are virtues that have one vice, delusion. The ruthless and a true joy of a fanatic in perpetrating atrocity retains a certain bleakly venerable radiance. Unaware of it himself, Javert in his fearsome gladness Unaware of it himself, Javert in his fearsome gladness, like every benighted individual who triumphs, was to be pitied. There was nothing so poignant and terrible as this face, displaying what might be called all the evil of goodness. Hot diggity damn. What I know of Les Miserables, the Broadway play, I saw it on Broadway in like 8th grade, so it's been a long time. And I saw a touring company and movies and stuff, but like, he doesn't look the way he does in the book in the Broadway plays. Like, what I'm reading in the book and I understand, his hair is combed like over his forehead, over his temples. It's much more forward. And, you know, the big coat and the thing. He looks like the hunter from Bloodborne, is basically the description that I'm getting from him in this book. Which is different than the much more military, nice fit coat, hair, smooth back, ponytail that I always see on stage. And so with that, I'm really enjoying the difference, you know, the way that this character is like this little righteous demon, you know. He's the opposite of the bishop. He's not, you know, his face is hidden. He's not, you know, forehead and face and eyes. He's this little, you know. I just love the idea that, like, you know, nothing looked off about him unless you really knew him. In which case you'd notice that his buckle being here instead of here, that guy must have been emotional. There was a recent episode of Star Trek where characters are watching Spock talk to another Vulcan, and then he finishes his conversation, stands up, turns, sees his friends, fixes his coat, his shirt, walks over and says, like, "I'm sorry you had to see, you know, that outburst." Kind of thing. It's like, he's a Vulcan. What are you talking about? But to him, that was emotional. So I just think that's funny. Same thing for this guy. Oh, the evil of goodness. Wow. That is a sentence. It's really good writing. It's exciting to read this. Chapter 4. Authority reasserts its rights. Fantine had not seen Javert since the day the mayor had rescued her from this man. Though nothing made sense to her sick brain, she had no doubt he had come back for her. She could not bear that terrible face. She felt she was dying. She hid her face in both hands and cried in anguish, "Monsieur Madeleine, save me!" Jean Valjean, from now on we shall not refer to him otherwise, had stood up. He said to Fantine in his gentlest and calmest voice, "Don't worry. It's not you that he's come for." Then he turned to Javert and said, "I know what you want." Javert replied, "Let's get a move on." There was in the modulation of the voice that accompanied these words something indescribably fierce and frenzied. Javert did not say, "Let's get a move on." He said, "Let's get a move on." No spelling can do justice to the way in which it was uttered. It was no longer human speech. It was an animal roar. He did not behave as usual, but he did not explain the situation. He did not produce any arrest warrant. In his eyes, Jean Valjean was a kind of mysterious and elusive combatant, a sinister opponent with whom he had been wrestling for the past 5 years without ever being able to fell him. This arrest was not a beginning, but an end. He merely said, "Let's get a move on." He remained exactly where he was as he said this. He cast a glance at Jean Valjean, that violently compelling glance, like a grappling hook by which he was accustomed to draw scoundrels to him. It was this glance by which Fantine had felt pierced to the core 2 months earlier. At Javert's cry, Fantine opened her eyes again. But Monsieur le Maire was here. What could she possibly have to fear? Javert stepped into the middle of the room and shouted, "Now get moving!" The poor woman looked around. There was no one other than the nun and the mayor. Who could be the object of this contemptuous familiarity? Only herself. She shuddered. Then she saw something unbelievable. So unbelievable that nothing to equal it had appeared to her even in the darkest of her feverish fits of delirium. She saw the police detective Javert seize Monsieur le Maire by the collar. She saw Monsieur le Maire bow his head. To her, it was as if the world had been turned upside down. Javert had indeed grabbed Jean Valjean by the collar. "Monsieur le Maire!" shrieked Fantine. Javert burst into laughter, that frightful laughter, with all his teeth bared. "There is no Monsieur le Maire here any more." Jean Valjean made no attempt to remove the hand on his coat collar. He said, "Javert." Javert cut him short. "Call me Monsieur l'Inspecteur." "Monsieur," said Jean Valjean, "I should like to have a word with you in private." "Out loud! Speak out loud!" replied Javert. "Anyone who has anything to say to me speaks out loud." Jean Valjean continued, keeping his voice low. "It's a favor I have to ask of you." "Speak out loud, I tell you." "But it's something only you should hear." "What do I care? I'm not listening." Jean Valjean turned to him and said rapidly in a very low voice, "Grant me 3 days' grace. 3 days in which to go and fetch this poor woman's child. I'll pay whatever's necessary. You can accompany me if you wish." "You're joking," cried Javert. "Honestly, I didn't take you for a fool. You're asking me to let you go away for 3 days. You say it's to go and fetch this whore's child? That's good. That's really good." Fantine trembled. "My child?" she cried. "Fetch my child? She's not here, then? Sister, answer me. Where's Cosette? I want my child. Monsieur Madeleine, Monsieur le Maire." Javert stamped his foot. "Now the other one. Shut up, you hussy. The degeneracy of this place, where convicted felons are magistrates and prostitutes are treated like duchesses. But all that's going to change, and high time, too." He gazed intently at Fantine, and once again, grabbing hold of Jean Valjean's cravat, shirt, and collar, he added, "I tell you there's no Monsieur Madeleine, and no Monsieur le Maire. There's a thief, a ruffian, a convicted felon named Jean Valjean, and I have him here. That's what there is." Fantine sat bolt upright, her arms stiff and both hands supporting her. She stared at Jean Valjean. She stared at Javert. She stared at the nun. She opened her mouth as though to speak. A rattle issued from deep in her throat. Her teeth chattered. She stretched out her arms in anguish, opening her hands convulsively and groping about her like someone drowning. Then she suddenly fell back on her pillow. Her head struck the bed frame and dropped forward onto her chest, her mouth gaping, her eyes open and dull. She was dead. Jean Valjean laid on his own hand. Jean Valjean laid his own hand on Javert's restraining hand and pried it open as he would have pried open the hand of a baby. Then he said to Javert, "You have killed that woman." "Enough!" shouted Javert in a fury. "I'm not here to argue with you. We haven't time for all this. The guard's downstairs. Now move, or I'll have you in thumb cuffs." In a corner of the room there was an old iron bed in quite a poor state that served the nuns as a camp bed when they were keeping vigil. Jean Valjean went over to this bed. In a split second dismantled the already very dilapidated bedstead, no obstacle to muscles like his, seized the main strut in his clenched fist, and eyed Javert. Javert retreated towards the door. With the iron strut in his hand, Jean Valjean walked slowly over to Fantine's bed. When he reached it, he turned and said to Javert in a barely audible voice, "I advise you not to disturb me just now." One thing is certain. Javert was trembling. He thought of going to summon the guard, but Jean Valjean might take advantage of that one moment to escape. So he stayed, grasped his cane by the thinner end, and backed up against the door frame without taking his eyes off Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean rested his elbow on the knob of the bedstead and his forehead on his hand, and fell to gazing at Fantine, lying there motionless. So he remained, absorbed, silent, and obviously no longer thinking of anything to do with this life. There was nothing but inexpressible pity now on his face and in his attitude. After a few moments of this meditating, he bent down and spoke to Fantine in a whisper. What did he say to her? What could this man, social outcast that he was, possibly have to say to that woman who was dead? What were those words? Not a living soul heard them. Did the dead woman hear them? There are some touching illusions that may perhaps be sublime realities. What is beyond doubt is that Soeur Simplice, sole witness to what happened, often said that at the moment Jean Valjean whispered in Fantine's ear, she distinctly saw an ineffable smile appear on those pale lips, and in those vacant eyes filled with the terror of death. Jean Valjean took Fantine's hand in both hands, and settled it straight on the pillow, as a mother might have done to her child. He retied the fastening of her nightdress, and tidied her hair under her cap. Having done that, he closed her eyes. Fantine's face seemed strangely illuminated at that moment. Death is the entrance to the supreme light. Fantine's hand was hanging out of the bed. Jean Valjean knelt down before that hand, gently raised it, and kissed it. Then he stood up again and turned to Javert. "Now I'm at your disposal," he said. Whew. Whew. It's a good book, Mega Man. Yeah, my voice is disappearing at the moment. What's nice is that despite, little vocal hardships and whatnot, like with projection, like my singing voice, still good. And I'm grateful for that. It's just that like the low end begins to a little bit. It's still there. I'm getting some rumble, but I'm not getting what I want to get out of it, especially when I'm just reading and reading softly. But, having a fun time. Hey, patreon.com/hotdadreads. If you want to support the stream, donate some money. We'd totally appreciate it. We just finished reading Julius Caesar on Saturday, and that's at any level, but the most basic $5 level, and that's really, the one that I'm hoping people sign up for. It's got access to all of the Shakespeare that we read. So we already finished Much Ado About Nothing. We finished Julius Caesar. I don't know what I'll do next. I'm thinking perhaps it's still being summer, might do a Midsummer Night's Dream. I don't know. It's a secret. We might do Romeo and Juliet. I don't know. We're just doing the plays that I've done. So it could be Othello. Who knows? Could be As You Like It. I have a sneeze coming. That's me. But also because I've done these productions, at least so far. I did Julius Caesar. I get to tell all the stories about what I did in the production and how that went and stuff like that. So I swear, we went for like an hour and a half on Saturday. 45 minutes of that was actually Shakespeare. The other 45 minutes were just me telling stories. So get your Shakespeare from the point of view of a Shakespearean actor. Here's some fun inside stories and stuff. Hear me, rant and rave about grape juice. Good times. Fun times. But again, that's at patreon.com/hotdadreads. And this is twitch.tv/hotdadreads. So if you're watching this on YouTube later on, pardon me, would highly love if you'd go to the corner and hit the follow button. We're trying to get 50 followers. We've got 24 so far, of which I'm grateful. But that's completely free, and don't worry about notifications. Don't worry about watching it live. If you do watch it live, hey, thanks. I love that you watch it live. It's so much fun. But when we get over 50 followers, then we can monetize the stream. And by monetize the stream, I only mean I can take money, add money from Jeff Bezos. If you guys want to give me money, here's where to do it. But I'm never going to come on, guys, you only get the stream if you give me money. I'm not going to beg for money. I'm going to advertise for money, but that's different. This is always going to be free. This is always for everybody. And if you want extra fun stuff, patreon.com. But aside from that, hitting the follow button does quite a lot of good for me. And I would truly appreciate it. We've got well over 100 followers on YouTube. We've got not over, I guess, but close to 50 followers on the socials and whatnot. Instagram, I barely use Twitter anymore. I don't really know how to market this on social media, but, we're there. I have a Blue Sky account, but it's only my own. I don't have one for the channel. I don't know. I'll figure that out later. But I don't know how to Blue Sky social things. I don't know how that works. But the point is that you can find me on the socials and whatnot if you want to tell me, hey, read this next, or this was funny, or whatever you want to talk about things. But we have, nearly 50 people there. So just trying to get everyone who likes the channel already, everyone who's on board, if people who are already watching, just hit the follow button. Surely would help me out. Thank you so much. Chapter 5, A Suitable Grave. Javert put Jean Valjean in the town gaol. The arrest of Monsieur Madeleine caused a sensation, or rather had an extraordinary impact on Montreuil-sur-Mer. Sadly, we cannot ignore the fact that at that simple statement, he was a convicted felon, almost everyone deserted him. In less than 2 hours, all the good he had done was forgotten, and he was nothing but a convicted felon. It is true to say that the details of what had happened at Arras were not yet known, Conversations like the following were to be heard all day long in every part of town. You don't know? He was a freed convict. Who? The mayor. No, Monsieur Madeleine? Yes. Really? Madeleine wasn't his real name. He was some frightful name. Bijon, Beaujun, Boujon. Oh my God. He's been arrested. Arrested? To prison in the town gaol, waiting to be transferred. Transferred? He's going to be transferred? Where are they transferring him? He's going to face trial for a highway robbery he committed some time ago. Well, I suspected as much. That man was too good, too perfect, too sanctimonious. He refused the Legion of Honor. He gave money to every little gutter snipe he came across. I always thought there was some unsavory story at the bottom of it all. The best circles, especially, were very much of this opinion. One old lady, a subscriber to Le Drapeau Blanc, made the following unfathomably deep remarks. I'm not sorry. That will teach the Bonapartists. So it was that the ghost who had called himself Monsieur Madeleine vanished from Montreuil-sur-Mer. Only 3 or 4 individuals in the whole town remained faithful to his memory. The old doorkeeper who had worked for him was one of them. The evening of that same day, this worthy old woman was sitting in her lodge, still thoroughly shocked, and sadly pondering the matter. The factory had been closed all day. The main entrance was locked. The street was deserted. There was no one in the house but the 2 nuns, Soeur Perpétue and Soeur Simplice, who were keeping vigil over Fantine's body. Towards the time Monsieur Madeleine usually came home, the honest doorkeeper automatically got up, took out of a drawer the key to Monsieur Madeleine's room, and picked up the candle holder he used every evening to go up to his quarters. Then she hung the key on the nail from where he would take it, and placed the candle holder nearby, as if she was expecting him. Then she sat down in her chair again, and returned to her thoughts. The poor, kind-hearted old woman had done all this without being conscious of it. It was not until more than 2 hours later that she emerged from her musings and exclaimed, "Oh, goodness me! My sweet Lord Jesus! And there I was, hanging his key on the nail!" At that moment the small window in the lodge opened. A hand passed through the opening, took the key and the candle holder, and lit the candle from the burning rushlight. The doorkeeper looked up, and was left open-mouthed with a cry in her throat that she stifled. She knew that hand, that arm, the sleeve of that coat. It was Monsieur Madeleine. It was several seconds before she could speak, stunned as she was. As she said to herself when later recounting her adventure, "My God, Monsieur le Maire!" she cried at last. "I thought you were—" She broke off. The end of her sentence would have been disrespectful to the beginning of it. Jean Valjean was still Monsieur le Maire to her. He completed the thought that was in her mind. "In prison," he said. "I was. I broke a bar in one of the windows. I jumped down from a rooftop, and here I am. I'm going up to my room. Go and fetch Soeur Simplice for me. She's probably with that poor woman." The old woman rushed to obey. He gave her no other instructions. He was quite sure she would protect him better than he would protect himself. No one ever found out how he managed to get into the courtyard without the main gate being opened. He had, and always carried with him, a passkey that opened a little side door, but he must have been searched and his passkey taken from him. This point was never explained. He climbed the staircase that led to his room. When he got to the top, he left his candle on the stairs, opened his door almost without a sound, and feeling his way, went over and closed his window and the shutter, then returned for the candle and came back into the room. It was a necessary precaution. Remember, his window could be seen from the street. He glanced around at his table, his chair, his bed which had not been slept in for 3 days. There was no trace of the disorder of the night before last. The doorkeeper had tidied his room. She had, moreover, picked out of the ashes and placed neatly on the table the 2 ferrules of his staff and the 40-sou piece blackened by the fire. He took a sheet of paper on which he wrote, "These are the 2 ferrules of my staff and the 40-sou piece stolen from Petit Gervais that I mentioned at the Court of Assizes." And he laid on this piece of paper the coin and the 2 bits of metal, so that this would be the first thing anyone would see on entering the room. He pulled out of a cupboard one of his old shirts, which he tore up. This gave him some pieces of cloth in which he wrapped the 2 silver candlesticks. Moreover, he was neither hurried nor agitated, and as he wrapped up the bishop's candlesticks, he bit into a piece of black bread. It was probably the prison bread he had brought with him when escaping. This was indicated by the crumbs found on the bedroom floor when the legal authorities later searched the premises. Yeah. There were 2 little taps at the door. "Come in," he said. It was Soeur Simplice. She was pale. Her eyes were red. The rushlight she was holding shook in her hand. It is a characteristic of the vicissitudes of fate that, no matter how cool and collected we may be, they wrest from our entrails our human nature and force it to reappear on the surface. In the emotional turmoil of that day, the nun had become a woman once more. She had been weeping, and she was trembling. Jean Valjean had just finished writing a few lines on a piece of paper, which he held out to the nun, saying, "Sister, will you give this to Monsieur le Curé?" The piece of paper was not folded over. She glanced at it. "You may read it," he said. She read the following: "I am Monsieur le Curé. I ask Monsieur le Curé to look after everything I am leaving here, from which he will kindly deduct the expenses of my trial and the burial of the woman who died yesterday. The rest is for the poor." The sister tried to speak, but could scarcely stammer out a few inarticulate sounds. However, she did manage to say, "Does Monsieur le Maire not want to see that poor unfortunate woman one last time?" "No," he said. "They'll be coming after me. I'd only have to be arrested in her room, and that would disturb her peace." He had hardly finished when there was a great commotion on the staircase. They heard a thundering of footsteps coming up, and the old doorkeeper saying in her loudest and most piercing voice, "My God, monsieur, I swear to God, no one's entered this house all day and all evening, and I haven't once left the door unattended." A man responded, "Yet there's a light in that room." They recognized Javert's voice. The room was so arranged that when the door opened, it screened the right-hand corner. Jean Valjean blew out the candle and went and stood in this corner. Soeur Simplice fell to her knees by the table. The door opened. Javert entered. The whisperings of several men and the protests of the doorkeeper could be heard coming from the corridor. The nun did not raise her eyes. She was praying. The rushlight was on the mantelpiece and gave only very little light. Javert saw the nun and stopped, taken aback. Remember, Javert's very essence, his natural element, the medium in which he could breathe, was veneration for all authority. He was uncompromising and would allow no objections or reservations. For him, of course, ecclesiastical authority was the highest of all. On this issue, as on all others, he was zealous, superficial, and punctilious. In his eyes, a priest was an unerring spirit, a nun, a creature incapable of sin. They were souls walled off from this world with only one connecting door that never opened except to let the truth come out. On seeing the nun, his first instinct was to withdraw. However, there was another duty that also bound him, an overriding duty that drove him in the opposite direction. His second instinct was to stay and venture at least one question. This was Soeur Simplice, who never in her life had lied. Javert knew this, and specially venerated her because of it. "Sister," he said, "are you alone in this room?" There was a dreadful moment in which the poor doorkeeper felt faint. The nun looked up and replied, "Yes." "Then," Javert went on, "forgive me for pressing you. It's my duty to do so. You haven't seen a certain individual, a man, this evening? He has escaped. We're looking for him. This man by the name of Jean Valjean, you've not seen him?" The nun replied, "No." She lied. She lied twice in succession, without hesitation, with the swiftness of self-sacrifice. "Pardon me," said Javert, and retired with a deep bow. "O sainted woman, you've been gone from this world for many years. You have rejoined your virgin sisters and angel brothers in the light. May this untruthfulness be counted in your favor in paradise." The nun's affirmation was for Javert something so conclusive that he did not even notice the peculiarity of that candle, which had only just been blown out and was still smoking on the table. An hour later, a man was walking through the mist and the trees, hurrying away from Montreuil-sur-Mer in the direction of Paris. That man was Jean Valjean. It has been established through the testimony of 2 or 3 carters who met him that he was carrying a bundle and was dressed in a smock. Where had he obtained that smock? It was never found out. But an old workman had died in the factory's infirmary a few days before, leaving only his smock. Perhaps it was that one. One last word about Fantine. We all have a mother, the earth. Fantine was returned to that mother. The parish priest thought he was doing the right thing, and perhaps he was, in preserving for the poor as much money as possible from what Jean Valjean had left. After all, who were these people? A convicted felon and a common prostitute. That is why he kept Fantine's burial simple and reduced it to that bare minimum called a pauper's grave. So Fantine was buried in that free corner of the cemetery that belongs to everybody and to nobody, in which the poor are doomed to disappear. Fortunately, God knows where to find the soul. Fantine was laid in darkness among the bones of anonymous others. She suffered the promiscuous fate of ashes. She was thrown into the common grave. Her last resting place was like her bed. So we end part 1. Part 2 is entitled Cosette. Book 1 is called Waterloo, Chapter 1, On the Way from Nivelles. But we're going to stop there. It's 10 o'clock. I always want to read for 2 hours, and it's hard, man. It's real hard. But, yeah. So, if you've been following along with me, We just read a fifth of the book. We finished all of part one of Les Miserables. That is a victory unto itself. I want to read the other four parts. I've been kind of considering reading a part and then doing a break, reading another book, doing a part, taking a break, kind of a thing. But because this is a book unto itself. I just read a whole book. There's 5 books essentially. It's ridiculous. But I don't know. Kind of pondering it. I think we're going to keep reading. We're going to do part 2, and then maybe we'll take a break. Because I know my schedule is going to get busy. So if we can get through part 2 in time, and I think we can. And then maybe, we'll take a break, we'll read something else, and we'll come back and we'll do more Les Miserables. We'll do it in chunks. And perhaps in that way, then I won't take Les Mis down from YouTube and Twitch and whatnot. It'll just remain in public consumption. Unlike the other things that we've read, that once we're done reading them, they're only available on patreon.com/hotdadreads. Whenever we finish Les Miserables, then, we'll put it up there. But for the time being, maybe we'll leave that there for public consumption. We'll do part 2. Then it'll be like September, October. And again, I'll be busy. I'll be doing a Iolanthe at that point. I don't know. It's spooky season. We might read Dracula. We might read Frankenstein. I don't know. Ooh, maybe we'll do an Edgar Allan Poe night tomorrow, like to celebrate finishing a book of Les Miserables. That could be fun. Pardon me. But hey, nonetheless, this is Hot Dad Reads. Thank you so much for coming. This is my cat, the captain. He's a good kitty. I'm covered in his hair. Yeah. Hopefully we'll be back again tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Yeah. Well, if we're doing Edgar Allan Poe, we don't have to read for 2 hours tomorrow, so maybe we'll do 10. I don't know. I'll actually update you guys on the social medias about what we're doing. But until then, thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit the like button, the follow button, the little heart, whatever it is on Twitch. We're looking for likes on Twitch. And thank you so much. Have yourselves an agreeable evening.